Hi, I'm Stephen, and welcome back to Unlocked Real Stories, Real Reform. Today's episode is a little bit different. This isn't just a conversation between a former inmate and a former correctional officer. This is somebody who actually knew me while I was incarcerated inside the Arizona prison system. Not only did we cross paths inside the system, he actually supervised me while I worked in visitation. So this conversation comes from real experience, real observation, and years of seeing each other inside one of the toughest environments a human being can actually live in. This episode is not about attacking correctional officers. It's not about attacking inmates. It's about telling the truth about what really happens inside these systems and having honest conversations about what actually needs to change. Because too often people on the outside only hear one side. They hear politics, they hear statistics, they hear public relations, but they rarely hear real conversations from people who actually lived and worked inside these environments every single day. But today that changes. I want to introduce my guest, Derek Rivas. He's a former correction officer, and I appreciate you coming on here today, Derek. For people watching, give everybody a little background about yourself. How many years did you work in corrections? What facilities or units did you work in? What was your role supervising visitation? And basically, what made you decide to come on this podcast and have this conversation publicly?
Well, yeah. So my name is Derek Rivas, and I worked for ASPC Safford Complex, dedicated to Tonner unit, really. I did work visitation for a few years, and I was a correctional officer for just a little over six. I also worked SSU, and I also worked the normal yard and everything that comes with the job. You know, I decided just to come on to this program of yours because I wanted to show my support to you. You always spoke about this inside visitation and how seriously that you were going to take it. And quite honestly, there was a part of me where that didn't really know how far you would go with it. And because now you're sitting here with Unlocked, I do think that it would be nice for you to have some support. So I'm glad to be here for that.
Well, I definitely appreciate that. And for the viewers that don't actually know, could you describe what SSU is for them?
So SSU is a special security unit. Essentially, we would handle all the contraband on the unit, monitoring phone calls, monitoring visitors, visitation, helping out with searches, basically keeping the unit as safe as possible, especially through like gang presence and gang members and stuff.
Okay, that's definitely an important position that you had for sure. One thing I think is important is that people understand that there are human beings on both sides of the prison walls. And because you actually knew me inside, I want to start there first. When you first met me, what stood out to you?
To be honest, what stood out the most was that you were persistent.
Okay.
Extremely, I would say extremely persistent, more than persistent. It would be
Okay.
like you needed an answer and you needed it now. Regardless of the situation, you were very persistent, and sometimes you could be a little hot-headed as well.
That I do agree with you, absolutely. And you saw that firsthand many times. But
Yes.
what do you remember the most about me during those years that stands out?
How you were with your parents inside visitation and how you could see the difference between when you're with family and not inside the walls, inside those gates. That's what I would say would stood out to me the most is the transition that you and everyone else in visitation could make. It's a I imagine how difficult it could be for you guys to be on those walls. So to see that happy transition and everyone get ready for visitation, you guys had on your nicest intimate uniforms. You had your nicest kicks on. I mean, you were
Mhm.
fresh to death, always shaved for the families. So, for me, how you were with your families, especially you with your mom and dad, really stood out to me the most.
Yeah, definitely. I cared about and still do about my mom and dad.
Oh yeah, of
Um,
course.
did did you see people inside genuinely trying to change?
you're going to have this some inmates who are going to be superficial, about changing and basically just want to kind of do their time and claim change that way they could just stay under the radar, but they might still have bad intentions. You had the other half that I would say did absolutely want to change and attempt to change.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely agree with you on that. And just from your perspective, what pressures do inmates deal with day to day that most people outside never fully understand? From your perspective, there.
What you guys would deal with day to day, honestly, just being constricted, like having, in all reality, you guys don't have any freedom in there. Everything's monitored. How you eat, how you make phone calls, like what you guys do on a day-to-day basis, everything's monitored 100%. So your restrictions and privacy definitely, probably in my eyes, would hold the most difficulty for inmates.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I definitely appreciate that perspective. Now let's pivot just a little bit. Let's talk about the correctional officer side of this, because I think the public misunderstands officers just as much as they misunderstand inmates. From your perspective, what made you become a correctional officer in the first place?
It was an opportunity to essentially help. And at the time, I was actually going to school for criminal justice, and I thought it would be a good opportunity to see like where I could go in a type of law enforcement environment.
Yeah, for sure. And once you got inside that environment, what did you realize the public didn't or doesn't see that you saw?
I realized that me going in even the first day to the last day I was there is that you're walking into the unknown. Every shift, every time you walk through, the Sally Port to go to work, it's every day's a risk. It's all unknown. How the day's gonna end up, how the day's gonna go, and there's this misconception that officers, mistreat inmates, and then there's this misconception that all inmates are bad, and neither of those things are true.
For sure. And for you, how stressful is that environment? How stressful was it day to day for you?
I'll tell you, when I first started, I actually started on graveyards. I went to graveyards, and it was kind of nerve-wracking for the first few months to go to work knowing like I'm gonna be there and I'm gonna be at night. We have to do face to IDs and everything like that. So we'd have to wake inmates up and make sure that we face to ID them and do everything, how we're supposed to do it. And it could be nerve wracking because you don't know the day that they just had or the day they're going to have. And a
For
lot of
sure.
inmates would get upset because of those kinds of things. So on graveyards, I was very sketched out every time until I left graveyards. I was.
Yeah, definitely. That's understandable. Now, this next question wasn't really, I didn't notice a big issue there on the unit we were on together. But how serious are staffing shortages really, in your opinion, statewide?
Awful. And I would say that that's no fault to the actual prison system. It's just you are really putting your life at risk, And I would say that I'm fortunate to have been an officer with Safford and Tonto Unit, Graham Unit, and Fort Grant because we didn't have the serious severity of issues that other units do have. So I would say that my experience was a good one, and I'm grateful for where I was because I don't know if I could have hacked it anywhere else.
No, that's understandable. I mean, that unit itself was amazing. I'll never stop talking about or wanting the whole system to be modeled after that unit because I believe the officers, and this is true talk, and you know me well enough. I believe the officers, the administration there, really cared. I don't know what it is about a smaller town sometimes, but that you guys really cared and really saw us as humans. And so the culture was different than some of the other units I'd ever been on. Now, I mean, prison is prison, and of course, it's not supposed to be fun necessarily fun, but we are human beings. It is supposed to be rehabilitative. And the setting that I saw at Safford, specifically the unit I was on, Tonto, was extremely rehabilitative. There was barriers set for the deputy warden there that I noticed to actually want to implement other things that could have even been better. But for that setting alone, I felt it was really, really where it should be for most units,
Yeah, and
especially on our.
oh
What?
yeah, I agree to that 1000%. And a lot of that can go to the Tana unit deputy warden as well.
Yeah, for sure.
She was a great deputy warden for Tano, and I mean, I couldn't have asked for, you know, a better boss for my unit. And she always pushed for the better. So with her guidance is what made Tana Tana.
Yeah, I absolutely agree to that. And I mean, me being able to see it firsthand and being able to work up there in front and actually seeing people behind the scenes, so to speak, not what we hear or feel on the yard,
Hmm.
and seeing people as, hold on, man, these people are really human and actually kind of cool. And they're not against us as behavioral problems, but for us to try to actually make things better. We kind of dictate those situations as inmates sometimes by our behavior and the way we're acting.
Hmm.
But one thing I do talk about constantly is prison culture. And because prison culture shapes behavior, as we're talking, it does shape survival, it shapes identity, it shapes hopelessness, and it shapes violence and addiction. From your perspective, how much does prison culture impact rehabilitation?
It's actually a very tough answer to give because it's hard to break inmate culture because that becomes your society. Like inmate culture with you guys as a population, that is your culture, that is your society. So it's almost impossible to break that mentality when it comes to rehabilitation within that society. Because all in all, like the inmate population, no matter what yard you're on, you guys have your own politics. You guys have your own way of doing things outside of policy. You guys have your own respect factor. You guys have what it's appropriate and not appropriate. You guys have your cleanliness factor. So the actual inmate population, I would say, it's tough to rehabilitate when you're trying to survive and live off of two separate ways of living at the same time, and that would be abiding by policy within the Arizona State prison system, and then that would be abiding by inmates and the inmate way of life. So I would say that it can be difficult for some.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you on that. Well, I'm going to switch this question just a little bit. How common are drugs and contraband really in the prison?
You know, on our unit, not very common at all. I mean, you could have some prison alcohol being brewed here and there, but in all reality, you know, inmates have birthdays, they have celebratory, just you know, ways of living, and sometimes you want to have a good time and break the rules. You know, so I would say that more more or less, you know, prison alcohol was bigger for like Tana unit because it was really tough to get any type of you know inappropriate contraband or drugs into the unit itself. Very difficult to
Yeah.
do.
Absolutely, and that's what I loved about Tonto Unit, and what I loved about Deputy Warden Hill was she didn't put up with no BS. I mean, plain and simple, this is what it was going to be, and if you did this on my yard, you got to go. And
Mhm,
for me, somebody with that kind of structure and showing that this is about rehabilitation, this is about you're going to survive this, you're going to live this, take advantage of what we have here, but keep that separate and out of this yard because all that does is hinder
mhm.
inmates from being able to progress and do other things. And I respected that about her and liked that about her. But she understood too, you know, that some of the little things were going to happen, and
Yes.
you know, but didn't overly emphasize on some of those smaller issues. Do you believe that officers sometimes feel trapped inside the system as well?
Yes. That
And
100%, yes.
okay, how much of prison becomes survival mode for both staff and inmates?
I would say when it comes to surviving, it's not so much an inmate, issue as it is a staff issue, only because staff is outnumbered, you know, 100 to 1. So, whenever you kind of reflecting on how you ask the question, survivability for inmates is much higher than survivability for officers if something were to happen.
Yeah, that's for sure because we did outnumber you guys at all times. And the way it is now with staff shortages and on different units, where there's one officer to 350
Yeah.
to 500 inmates, I mean, that number alone is just is crazy that they have to cover that many inmates, and there's no way they can if incidents happened. One reason I wanted you on here is because you treated me like a human being, Derek, and you still did your job, but you treated people with respect, which I respected, and that matters more than people actually realize. What do you think treating inmates with dignity? Why do you think treating inmates with dignity actually matters?
Because if you treat an inmate like trash, they're gonna leave the prison system feeling like trash, and they're gonna have no real way of rehabilitating outside the walls. Like, say you have an officer mistreating an inmate, that inmate finally gets out. That one moment that that inmate's mistreated outside of the prison system, they could wail. They could just release all that frustration out and just hammer down on someone or just make a real bad decision. So treating people with dignity inside the prison system is just a subtle thing that officers can do for inmates to help them rehabilitate and do the reentry into the real world.
For sure, for sure. Do you think that respect helps reduce tension inside the system?
Yes, I mean that's an absolute yes as well, because without respect, there's no order, and without order, you don't have a prison system. And the one thing that separates that from officers from inmates is that they know their role. An inmate will know that they are an inmate, and an officer will know that they are an officer. And as long as you stay within those boundaries and those policies and civilizations that I was just speaking about, as long as you stay within those windows and keep that respect there, there's no issues. So
For
yeah,
sure.
absolutely. Respect really guides the prison system itself, not just
So inside,
policies.
absolutely. Inside the system itself, what do you think happens when a staff loses empathy for an inmate?
What happens when a staff member loses empathy for an inmate?
Yeah.
Well, usually all is lost at that point for that officer, and that will be recognized because word of mouth travels through inmates so fast that once disrespect starts happening, it will be known. It will get across the yard within 30 minutes. It'll get through the dorms, or wherever you're staying. And, disrespect will come to that officer for giving you, you get the respect that you give. And if you're given disrespect, you're going to get disrespect.
For sure. For sure. After working years of working around incarcerated people every single day, did it change your perspective on people as a whole at all?
It taught me that people have limits. Whether or not you are inside as a prisoner or leaving as an officer, people have limits. And sometimes those limits are absurdly rough to deal with.
Yeah, for sure. With the way it is inside the system right now, and if we're being honest, everybody knows something needs to change. The question is, what actually works? In your opinion, what do you believe Arizona prisons need the most right now?
More staff that do carry the trait of empathy. And
Okay.
I would say that how Tano is structured, and basically it's almost like just Tano's structured not as a prison, but as a prison at the same time. Tano's structured for inmates to basically live freely without feeling incarcerated, but while being incarcerated. So I think
Yeah,
that more yards should be built around, Tano. And there would be a difference between, regular GP and, the type of yards that Tano was, or, the fort. So I think just a nice little culture change could definitely change that for inmates inside.
yeah, for sure. Absolutely. What I've been working on is a separated housing unit and an earned transition unit. I believe personally that rehabs need to be implemented inside the prison system across the state, at least one on each yard, to give every inmate the opportunity to be able to get off the drugs And I want it to be able to mirror real rehabilitative programs such as it is outside. That means detox, that means the program, and then to earn incentives after that, and to be accountable at all costs, all times, and to not have any idolization time in between their programming, and really start to dig into what's causing them problems, such as the past traumas and different things. But what do you think? Do you think rehabilitation is starting too late in the prison system with programs such as a second chance, where it's only 90 days to the gate, to really start focusing on things? Or do you think rehabilitation is fine the way it is?
I think that the moment you become an inmate, your rehabilitation starts, and it's up to you to accept it or not accept it. And I truly believe that the way that the prison is structured, that is kind of the point is, prison is a punishment. And when you start to serve that punishment, that's when your rehabilitation begins. But a lot of people might look at that as like, oh, like the prison system, screwed me over, or, I was innocent. So they're not gonna like embrace what they need to at the start. So I think that the opportunity for rehabilitation exists the moment the bar's shut, but it's really up to the inmate to accept it or not. So whenever we talk about, 90 to the gate and other things like that, I think that those are great, great things to come out of it, especially, if it's not like a really hardcore offense or anything like that, or you're not a repeat offender. You're not a repeat offender either. So I do think that those things are great for the prison system, because sometimes it just takes one mistake and then boom, you never see an inmate, back in prison. Sometimes there are cases where inmates do learn their lesson and then that's it. So I do think that, programs like that work, but at the same time, the inmate has to accept it at the like that the rehabilitation has already started. It does like those programs are set as ways for an inmate to basically have an incentive to stay on good behavior, but it starts when that punishment begins. And I solely believe that it's on the inmate at that point.
And I 100% agree with you, and that's the way it should be. It's really about taking accountability for yourself or your actions when you're placed
Yes.
into a system. But I also believe that these systems should be able to present real rehabilitative programming, and not certificates that are recycled over and over with a different name that's not and been proven not to help anybody,
You
because
know,
they're
I,
doing the same programs.
I
And
can
so,
agree to that. I can agree to that. I do think like your idea of having like a rehabilitation center within the prison system, I think it is a good idea because you have other units that aren't Safford, other complexes that aren't Safford that have drug problems and that have drugs that come into the units. And you have, frequent and chronic users of those drugs. So
yeah.
an actual rehabilitation inside that's more, outside of like general population, I think is a wonderful thing. I think it's a good idea.
Absolutely. And when we say general population compared to all the other yards, it's going to be a separate housing unit with no tech.
And
Excuse
and
me, no
that's
tag.
my point. Yeah, that's my point. Yep.
And
Yeah, it
it
has to be
should be
separate.
definitely a separate unit to separate them from the chaos and the triggers, and be able to give people the real chance to be able to change and not have to face what they were in, and feel like they can be in a safe space,
Hmm.
because numbers and statistically, more than half of the inmates being released are coming back to prison. And that's showing me in itself that the programs didn't work the first time, didn't work the second time. How many times are we going to recycle these same programs and expect it to work the third time, fourth time, and fifth time?
And
Something
and
needs to
I
change.
I can agree to that, but at the same time, and that is also up to the individual to not be a repeat offender too. So
Yeah.
I guess like they would have a greater chance if they had like a different or better program to go through while being incarcerated, and I can agree to that. But as soon as they step outside the walls, and the reentry begins into the real world, it's truly up to them to like if you have someone who has a four-time offense for the same offense, like the issue wasn't the prison system, it was the person.
Well, I agree with you, but sometimes those people have never been given the tools and learned how to change. It's almost like an infant. You have to take people back to infancy because what they have learned is learned behavior mostly, either culturally or through experiences in their own life, through drugs or whatever this case may be. And this is behavior that has to be unlearned. And if they're not given the proper tools, not a certificate for participating, but real character changing type behavior programming that they can really dive in within themselves and learn who they are and learn how to change, then I don't believe nothing's ever going to change. Even that person that maybe wants to, but doesn't have the willpower that maybe other inmates or different people might have, and the skills or tools to be able to implement them to become a better person. And that does fall back on the Arizona Department of Corrections, because if somebody's incarcerated because of their bad behavior and they're put into a system that's putting out to the public, we are going to rehabilitate this person, then you need to offer real rehabilitative programming, not just certificates for participation or things that really are not applicable to what they're going on with inside them, such as trauma behavior or things that really need to be addressed that causes them the problem, such as using drugs or wanting to escape reality and so forth. So I do agree with you. But what programs do you believe actually seem to help people that you have seen? What kind of programs?
Usually, programs that involve some type of education really help inmates. It really keeps their mind on, their homework and, the studying, and it really helps them stay focused on school. That way, they're not focused on, maybe falling into bad behavior again. So I do think like the educational opportunities, especially that Safford offers, I think that that's a great way for inmates to stay proactive and rehabilitate.
Absolutely. I felt like the programs there in Safford and being able to go into college and sit down and work on schoolwork and have something I get to go back with and work on. And, it really made me feel more like I'm doing something to change different things. If you could realistically change three things tomorrow inside the system, what would they be?
More staff, absolutely. Talking about how there needs to be more programs for the Arizona State prison system to rehabilitate inmates better. That starts with more staff. 100%. You need more staff. Um, Another thing that could possibly change is maybe having the building that you're requesting for rehabilitation, or like what what word, the building, the program that you're talking about.
Like a separated housing unit or
Yes,
rehabilitative
a re-
rehab?
yeah, a rehab. There you go. I think that a rehab is a really good idea to
Yeah,
post in there for drug users. Absolutely, for sure.
for sure.
And outside of those two things, I really can't think of a third, because staffing, in order to have, major improvements, you need the staff to do it. So that would be the first thing I would change, is to have more staff. But it's not a consequence of or like the prison system trying to get staff. It's just that it's a dangerous job, and it's not a job that people enjoy to do. And then a rehab center, like within the yard of a prison, I think is a great idea as well. Um,
Absolutely.
if we're going to add a third, I would say just more educational opportunity. Maybe just stray outside of just HVAC, or just the small things that they could do, and go a little, make it a little bit a wider variety. And I think
Sure.
more education in the prison system would invoke, more change.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Derek, I definitely appreciate you coming on here and having this conversation with me, because people need to understand something. And I mean this because I consider you my friend, but not every correctional officer is the enemy, and not every inmate is hopeless. There are human beings on both sides of these walls. And if we truly want safer prisons and lower recidivism, we want stronger communities and real rehabilitation, then we have to stop operating in silos like most of these programs are. And we need to start listening to people who actually lived and worked inside these environments. But I want to definitely thank you for coming on and sharing your perspective and your opinion about everything. Again, I consider you my friend and somebody that, and I've told you this more than once, somebody I look up to, respect, and appreciate for the way you treated me inside the system. And we never crossed that line, but we had that respect between each other and still treated each other like human beings. So I want to definitely thank you for that. And I appreciate you coming on Unlocked in my podcast and getting your story out and sharing with people that are watching different perspectives. Again, my name is Stephen Barger. This is Unlocked, Real Stories, Real Reform. And I appreciate everybody tuning in. Make sure that you subscribe, like, and share with others. And definitely share this episode with other people that you believe could get something out of this and need to hear this. I'll definitely see you on the next episode. Again, thank you for watching.